Here today, and it's even more of a pleasure to see so many of you out here at a JFK Assassination conference, and I think most of you are probably in the camp of Oswald was innocent, or at least you're in the camp of, I think there's a serious question about Oswald's participation. First off, let me ask this. How many people here are from the news media here locally? Anybody out there? No, of course not. I mean, it's only happening in downtown Dallas in the center of the city, and we've got several hundred people here, you know, and we're talking about serious matters. Why should the news media pay any attention? Well, and that prompts me to mention the experience we've just gone through, which some people call an election. Let me tell you the truth of the matter. This was not an election. This was a referendum on the New World Order. And we kicked them in the teeth. And even though right now it looks like, well, it was really squeaky clean, you know, oh, almost. I mean, and I was saying months before that the game plan was to run the numbers up as close as they could so they could fudge them, okay? Drop a decimal point here or there and push it to Hillary. But I'm telling you, the people in this country woke up. They realized that the national mass media is just lying to them, that these polls are skewed, okay? And I want to tell y'all, if it wasn't for the rampant voter fraud that took place, I think you would have seen the popular vote go to Trump by about 80%, okay? But even with the massive voter fraud, which by the way didn't just start this year, I mean it's been going on ever since Lyndon Johnson and Box 13, you know. But it's gotten worse and worse with this computer thing because I know there were so many instances here in Texas where people reported going to the polls and trying to vote a straight Republican ticket, and then before the whole thing clicked off, it flipped to a Democratic ticket, okay? Now that kind of stuff, you know, with these, I'm trying to tell people, I'll tell you all, we'll never again have an honest election until we return to paper ballots that we can go back and count, okay? And poll watchers. Okay, now a lot of you younger folks, anybody under 50 probably don't even know what a poll watcher is. Each party, every party represented, even any party not represented on the ballot. In fact, even as a private citizen, you have a right to go to your polling place and tell them you're a poll watcher. And you can't interfere with anything, you can't say anything, can't hold up signs, but you can stand there and watch the vote all day long. Now, if we were to return to paper ballots and poll watchers, we'd go back to having honest elections. But John's already, again, stole my thunder. I mean, we all know what has happened to this country since John F. Kennedy was killed. All right? But here today, we are still sifting through the details. I keep having people who have not paid much attention to the subject, they continue to ask me, will we ever know what happened? You know, excuse me, we know now, right? We know. We don't know all the details, and frankly, I hate to tell you this, we may go to our graves not knowing all the details, okay? But we know enough. We know enough. We know that by the fall of 1963, John Kennedy had managed to alienate almost every stout, violent faction in this country. The mafia, his brother was prosecuting the mafia as never before or since. The war in Vietnam, okay, yes, he had caved into the Pentagon, but between the time he took office and the time he was assassinated, he did approve a rise in the military advisors in Vietnam, but I guarantee you, in my mind, and I think most of you will agree with me, John F. Kennedy would never have allowed the introduction of ground combat troops in South Vietnam. I'm just convinced of that. And of course that comes back to National Security Action Memorandum 273, which he said he agreed with the report of the McNamara report, which said we'll be able to disengage and get out of Vietnam by 1965. And in there it also says, make no public announcement, but begin the withdrawal of 1,000 military advisors by the end of 1963. Okay, so he was taking immediate steps to disengage us from Vietnam. Now what happened? Well, he's killed on Friday. On Monday, November the 25, you got President Johnson issuing National Security Action Memorandum 274, which says, well, our position in Vietnam remains unchanged, so that would stop most people from reading the rest of it because, oh, it's unchanged. And yet if you continue reading, you say, however, we will not reduce any military or economic aid since the time of the DM brothers. Well, they were murdered on November the 1st, 1963, which essentially says that blocked the pullout order for the 1,000 military advisors. And of course, it was they kept building up in Vietnam, and by August of 1964, we had the phony Gulf of Tonkin incident, which never even happened. Okay, and that's been admitted to. This big article in U.S. News and World Report some years back said the phony battle that led to war. All right, and then Johnson, of course, fully knowing what's going on, goes to Congress and says, our bodies are floating in the water. Give me the power to respond to this provocation. And they passed the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which abrogated the Constitution of the United States, which clearly states only Congress shall have the power to declare war. And they gave it to Johnson. And then immediately by September of 1964, he introduced Marine combat troops in Vietnam. The Army began to build up, and we went on to have that debacle that we now know as the Vietnam War. Okay, in 1962, the Kennedy Tax Act. You had people like Exxon who had refineries in the Bahamas, and they weren't paying taxes on it because it wasn't in the United States. And in the Kennedy Tax Act of 1962, we find that he starts closing these loopholes for the giant corporations. Now they're against him, all right? And so he, now he's got the mafia against him, got the military against him, got the CIA against him, because he told the New York Times, after the Bay of Pigs, he was going to take the CIA and splinter it into 1,000 pieces and cast it to the winds. He's going to do away with it, as well we should. And while he's at it, I wish he'd take the TSA too. I mean, you all do know how many terrorists the TSA has caught, right? None. But boy, they're groping Granny. Bunch of idiots. Thankfully, one time I said, I'm not going in that full body scanner. I said, that's got that terahertz radiation and it decouples your DNA. I said, I don't think I'm going to go in that. They said, well, you have to go for a pat down. And I said, I don't know. Acting real dumb, real old, which I kind of am. wasn't hard to act like that. But I actually got them to grope each other. The guy says, no, we just use the back of our hand. We did it. I'm going, oh, what? You know? So he gets another TSA guy over there and he gropes him. All right. All right, so there, Kennedy's, he's pissed off everybody. And everybody got together, all right? And there was a consensus reached. And the people at the very top, and I'll tell you, this isn't the absolute top of the food chain, but at the near top of the food chain was Allen Dulles, who'd been fired by head of the CIA, okay, and yet remained on board for another year, and really got it all set up, especially with his underlings, whose loyalty was not to Kennedy, but to Allen Dulles. And then also, of course, they had to bring in Lyndon Johnson and his next door neighbor and old buddy, J. Edgar Hoover. So now they know they can control the investigation no matter what happens. And that's why the Kennedy assassination, I always tell young people that's the place to start, because it was one of the first, and it was a prototype, and as such there were glitches and there were problems. And that's why you can still see what's going on. And of course, I'm preaching to the choir here because most of you people have already read that stuff. If you don't know some of these details, read my book. And by the way, in case you didn't know, a lot of you may have read the original Crossfire, which came out in the 80s. And I'm still very, very proud of that because when I did this 2013 update and revision, there was very little to revise because I'm a journalist. I pledge to be a journalist. I try to be a journalist, and that means I don't just take anything at face value, and that I double check my sources, sometimes triple check my sources. And what I put down in that book is, for the most part, as valid today as it was then. But there's more now because, number one, I got to have a picture section like I really wanted. Have a picture of the badge man, the guy firing from behind the fence on the grassy knoll. Have a picture of the smoke drifting off the grassy knoll, which of course we were told for years, well, that can't happen because modern rifles don't smoke. Well, excuse me, yes they do, okay? Especially if they're freshly oiled, because the oil burns off and comes out as a big white puff of smoke. And I have a photograph of it in my book. On and on. One of the things I'm most proud of is that I went, and now, how simple is this? There were these two surveyors, Bob West, who was the official county surveyor for Dallas, and then his buddy Chester Brenneman, who then worked with Bob and then went on to do survey work as the official surveyor of Eastland County out in West Texas. Well, years ago, as a reporter, I got hold of both of them. And Chester Brenneman was kind enough to let me copy their original plat map of Dealey Plaza that they had done for the Warren Commission. Actually, they did two. The Monday following the assassination, both Bob West was hired to do survey work in Dealey Plaza for Life magazine. And I don't have to go into CIA connections to Life magazine. Chester Brenneman just happened to be in the office with him, and he says, hey, come on, help me. He said, okay. And then later that spring, both of them did the survey work for the Warren Commission. Chester Brenneman was kind enough to let me copy his original plat map, and I published the street map in my book. When I went to the Warren Commission and I found that they had reproduced this map, I noticed that it wasn't the same as the one that Chester Brenneman had given me. They had left out their remarks saying that where the first bullet struck could not be seen from the 6th floor window to the 6th floor depository. Okay? And also they had taken out a bullet mark on the south side of Elm Street. All right, and then they had also taken out a couple other things. The key thing, though, was in the, they were, of course, doing all this in relation to the Zapruder frames, the Zapruder film, which we now know was altered in significant ways. But then, the ones they presented to the Warren Commission were changed. In fact, both of them told me that the Warren Commission altered their numbers. Now, why is this important? Because a lot of you have probably seen some of the recent specials and stuff, you know, a computer simulation of how it's entirely possible for Oswald to have done, you know, 3 shots and 3 men and, you know, 1 rifle, you know. Well, okay, when they did these computer simulations, what do they base it on? They base it on the numbers in the Warren Commission. And both surveyors say they changed the numbers. So in other words, what I'm telling you is, don't trust any of these computer simulations because they're based on changed numbers. All right? Now, in my book is a whole lot of stuff, but there's also a lot of stuff that's not there. So you guys being aficionados and really caring about this, I'm going to try to tell you a few things that was not in the book because I can't prove it, okay? For example, and this fits exactly into Judyth Berry Baker's story about Oswald trying to prevent the assassination. I can't prove this, but I heard from several Dallas policemen back in the day that about a week or so before the assassination, they had received a letter signed A.J. Heidel. Does that sound familiar? It was warning that Kennedy was going to be killed when he came to Dallas, and they were urging the Dallas police to take extra precautions and blah, blah, blah. Well, of course, they went to Dallas Police Intelligence. They'd never heard of an A.J. Hidell, so, they just filed it away. Then after the assassination, and Oswald's name was brought up, and then it was brought up that he had used, he had a secret selective service card on him in the name of Alex J. Hidell. So immediately they began to put the connection to the two names, except by Monday morning, the FBI had gone through the Dallas police headquarters and with a fine-tooth comb. I had them tell me they were even searching motorcycle officers' saddlebags. They were opening all their lockers. They went through everything. And of course, by the next week, when they went back and tried to find this letter from A.J. Hidell, it's gone. That's why it's not in my book, but I'm telling you about it, because that substantiates what Judyth is saying about Oswald trying to warn people. All right. I also happen to know, I couldn't prove, but I heard from a very reliable source that his brother Robert had been in connection or in some way working for the CIA. And this makes a lot of sense too, because that would be exactly how the intelligence community could have learned about Lee Harvey at a very young age. And that definitely happened because his mother, well, number one, Marguerite, I spent a lot of time with her, and believe me, she was not crazy, okay? She knew things that were so out of kilter with what was the common knowledge at the time that it made her sound like crazy. But for instance, she told me incessantly that my son works for the United States government, okay? And now we know, yes, he did. John Newman, the very respected military historian, in his book, Oswald CIA, proves beyond any shadow of doubt that Oswald was being used by the CIA prior to the assassination. All right, now he could not, that was based on internal CIA memos and traffic, their own words, in other words. Okay, now that does not prove that Oswald knew he was working for the CIA, although I strongly suspect he was, based on everything I'm telling you now. His mother said he's working for the government, okay? Judyth Baker says they were both working for the CIA. And keep in mind, when you say somebody's working for the CIA, that does not mean, I caught my assistant earlier referring to someone as a CIA agent. Well, there's CIA employees, and then there's agents, and then there's assets, and then there's, there's various sundry ways. I know when I made a trip to Israel back in the 70s, and when I came back, a guy contacted me and said, I'm with something like public services or civilian contact, something like that. And he started asking me some questions about what I saw and experienced in Israel. Well, I was a good patriotic American. Why would I suspect any problem there? And besides, it wasn't like I was telling secrets or anything. I just told him, what I saw, gave him some insight. Now, as I come along, I look back and I'm pretty sure this guy filled out a report and went back to the CIA. That's how they gather information. But that doesn't make me a CIA agent or even a CIA operative. I didn't even know about it at the time. And that goes on and on. And this leads me to another thing that I want to really impress on you folks. Dallas in 1963 was an entirely different time and place. Okay? It was just not like today. It was a great big little town. And as in every little town, there was a pecking order. Okay? You had Eric Johnson, and you had Gordon McClendon, and you had H.L. Hunt, you had all these people, and they were pretty much at the top, and then everybody just followed their lead. Okay? In 63 in Dallas, there were still colored and white bathrooms and drinking fountains. Okay? And that's an important thing to understand, because at that time and place, if a police officer came up to a black person and said, 2 and 2 is 5, right? They go, yes, sir. Yes, sir. They'd tell them anything they wanted to know, because they learned, what happens if you don't. And so, gladly, that's a different time and place. It's not like that now, but that's the way it was then. You also have to understand that most of the cops at that time, if they hadn't been Dallas policemen, they would have been truck drivers. because most of them were veterans. And this is something very important to understand too. A lot of them came out of World War II, and the rest came out of Korea. And then they didn't like that truck driver pay, so they went and applied and became a Dallas policeman. Of course, it helped if you remember the Ku Klux Klan or the John Birch Society. Okay, and then it was a good old boy network. That's important to understand. And with all the prejudices that was going on at that time. And that could explain a whole lot of things, why some of the witnesses said what they said, why some of the police said what they said, how it all operated. You just have to understand all this. Along with that, let me explain that some of you probably seen that picture of me dancing on Jack Ruby's stage with Kathy Kay. She was a real hottie. And she came from England. She had a really neat little clipped British accent. But I want you to understand that when you say Jack Ruby's strip club, okay, well, that's true, there were strippers, but it was not one of these nudie bars like they have today with, you know, naked women climbing poles or whatever they do. Personally, I've never been in one. Well, wait a minute, maybe for journalistic reasons. No, actually, the Carousel Club, number one, the Carousel Club, and it's, I was going to say adjoining, actually, the parking lot in between the Colony Club and then the Carousel Club. These are about the only two things going on in Dallas after about 6 or 7 o'clock at night, okay? And I want to tell you the Carousel Club was actually more like the last vestiges of vaudeville, because they had a stage, they had a curtain, they had a live band. They would have various acts. They'd have ventriloquists, they'd have stand-up comics, they'd have a memory, mind-reading act or whatever, you know. And then, of course, in between the acts, they'd have a stripper come out and strip down. But hey, when they stripped down, they were down to essentially bra and panties. You can see worse than that on primetime TV this time today, okay? So I just don't want you to get the idea that the Colony Club was, you know, some real low-life place. Actually, you know, it was, you know, lawyers and city officials and policemen, everybody went there. Yeah, I'll never forget, I've got a block here. Who's the guy in the white suit, the big white hat, holding on to Oswald when he was shot?
Jim Lavelle.
Jim Lavelle, thank you. I'll never forget talking with Jim Lavelle and his wife in a green room up in New York for one of those talk shows we were all on. And his wife was sitting here on the van, and I had stood up to talk to Jim Lavelle. Hey, Jim. Well, he was tall. And I said, Jim, you know, did you ever go in Ruby's club? And before he could say anything, his wife popped off and said, oh, well, we're in there all the time. And he gave her one of those go-to-hell looks and said, well, I might have been in there, you know, a few times on official business. Nah, and everybody went, there's the place to go. See, this is why, and after the assassination, that was such a terrible and shocking thing. Everybody ran for cover. You know, even Oswald's best friend, I didn't know him, you know. And that went all the way down the line, and particularly as it all sunk in. Because keep in mind, it's really no use to have a coup if nobody knows you've had a coup. So what they had to do was, and it's actually pretty interesting how this has come down. For one thing, the cover-up has never been a cover-up in the classic sense of a cover-up. Because usually we think of a cover-up, well, there's no facts. Well, in this case, it's the opposite. The cover-up is by obfuscation. You know, there's so many facts, so many contradictory facts, that the average person just goes, man, I can't take anymore, and never mind, I don't want to hear anymore. And that's the cover-up. And then the way they worked it out is that when the assassination happened, and they put immediately, I mean within hours, said Oswald did it all by himself, thinking people, and particularly people in the top end of the business world, the political world, corporate world, they understood, you know, wait a minute, this isn't right. So, aha, this is a coup. So they understood it. And they also understood that they should go along with it if they valued their business and their profession and their life, perhaps. But then all the rest of us, we just watched TV And we're going, well, I guess Oswald did it. And to this very day, as you well know, the mass media, the corporate mass media, that is now owned by only one of 5 corporations, and these 5 corporations have interlocking directorships and ownerships. So in other words, a handful of people determine everything you see and hear. And I'm not just talking about news. I'm talking about books, book clubs, satellite, cable, Netflix, everything. It's all owned by one of these 5 corporations. Billboards, magazines. That's another thing. When I was back in the days of the old republic, there were about just a handful of major magazines that people read in this country. There was Life and Time, Saturday Evening Post, and then there was U.S. News and World Report, Time, Newsweek. Okay, Look.
Harrell.
Yeah, no, that's a newspaper. That's a start saying newspaper, but I was being too kind to it. Reader's Digest, okay? And now today, if you go check, you'll find there's about 28,000 magazines out there today, okay? There's mountain climbing magazine, mountain bike, snow skiing magazine, everything for everybody, but they've got us all separated. Now, we all read one thing here and something over there, and we don't get the big picture. That's how you keep it all down. And of course, John's already explained to you what they do in the broadcast media, which is even under tighter control than the print media. I had trouble at the Star-Telegram getting stories in, but if I could, that was at the time when the Carter family owned it, but at that same time, if I could prove up what I was saying, or if I had 3 or 4 sources, they grudgingly would run the story. But obviously that's not happening today, because if I was a news editor for the Dallas Morning News, I'd have somebody here covering this meeting, In fact, that reminds me of an experience I had several years back when you had 2 fellows on the stage at one of the old JFK conferences, Gerald Custer, who was the man who took the x-rays, and then also Paul O'Connor, thank you, who took the body out of the casket, and Aubrey Reich, the ambulance driver, who wrapped Kennedy's body up, put it in the coffin, big bronze coffin, and shipped it out to Air Force One to travel back to Washington. And Dennis O'Connor, who was the first to receive the body there at Bethesda, and it was in a slate gray shipping casket, okay, in a zippered body bag, all right? Two totally different accounts, which shows you that there's something not right going on. I was standing in the back listening to this along with Mike Cochran, who at that time was the head of the Associated Press in Texas, headquartered in Fort Worth, and came to Dallas for all these things. And I said, Mike, you hearing this? He said, yeah. I said, you going to write about it? He said, probably not. And he didn't, and they didn't, and there was no talking about this. This just isn't right. I get as fired up as John, but I don't know. Maybe he's older and more tough than I am. I just don't want to have to go through the screaming and hollering every time I talk about it. But it's you can't believe your media. You can't believe, and you certainly can't believe your polls, can you? Unfortunately, we are learning this, and it's painful. But hey, think about when you were a teenager. That's a painful period in your life, and yet that's the period you probably grow the most. So yeah, all this is painful, but we're growing, and we're knowing more and more. And I think this is why now we're seeing as I said earlier about a referendum against the New World Order, we're seeing this happening. Brexit, that was a revolt against the New World Order. Yes. This latest, if you want to call it election we had, that's a referendum against the New World Order. That's right. And I think this shows us a way for the future. We don't have to get out in the streets, burn something down. I never quite understood that either. Somebody's oppressing me, so I'm going to burn down my grocery store. I don't get it. But anyway, this shows us we don't have to have the violent revolution that Kennedy forewarned us about, as cited by John prior to me about, you know, you're going to make revolution inevitable. Well, I think what we see is we're having a relatively violent-less revolution as more and more people wake up. And it's not due to any of our establishments like the media or our politics. It's all happening because of the internet, okay? Now, let me give you a little caution about the internet. The upside of the internet is that anybody and everybody has access to the internet. The downside is that anybody and everybody has access to the internet, okay? So you got to go to the internet with a little bit of discernment. Read my book. No, but read other books. Read, study, look at alternative sites, okay? Because you cannot go to one place and get it all wrapped up. That's what a lot of you, and certainly most of the public, that's what they really want. That's what they want when they turn on their TV. They don't want to really hear all about all of so-and-so shooting here and a car wreck over there. They simply want to know what's going on, and more importantly, what does it mean to me? All right? And that's what they're not getting, really. They're just getting an earful of yada, 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 and then they go away thinking, gee, what does all that mean? They don't know. So don't expect any one person, me or anyone else, to be able to give you, you know, 25 words or less is what's going on. That's pretty funny too. I can't tell you how many times I've been asked, well, hey, Kennedy assassination, you know, 25 words or less, what happened there? Yeah, you guys get it, right? You can't just say it, can you? Although I did work it down to 25 words or less. I said, okay, here's what happened. John F. Kennedy was shaking up the status quo, and the status quo struck back. But of course, you tell somebody that, they go, ah, how do you know that? How can you prove that? You know, blah, blah, blah. And unfortunately, the only way that you can really bring them up to speed is to start going through all of the little details, okay? The mayor of Dallas, his brother was General Charles Harrell, who got fired by Kennedy, and he was liaison with the CIA, and he was behind the Bay of Pigs, little details like that. Or you know, you've got the blind man, Ed Hoffman, you know, who saw the guy fire from behind the fence and toss it to a compass. And what'd I say? Oh, no, excuse me. I'm sorry, Ed. No, he was deaf, that's right, from childhood, by the way. Really great guy, and I'll never forget the morning that I met him and his daughter, I guess, that acted as an interpreter, and some other people, and we went up on the knoll, and we walked the whole thing with him explaining everything, you know. And I think I only made one mistake in translating and giving his account, and that was he was talking and describing about the man he saw behind the fence that first ran with the gun, and I said, did he have a suit on? And I thought he said yes, but later they said, well, what he meant was he had a nice coat, or it was the other way around. So anyway, just a small detail. But yeah, so Hoffman and other people like this, it's all there on the record. All you have to do is really study it. And so today, when people say, will we ever know the truth? What I really want to do is grab them by the shirt and say, look, if you read, you know the truth, you know, because it's all out there. You all have access. When I got into this, again, actually when it happened, and I got into it because that very weekend, as I'm watching TV, and I'm hearing all of these people describe the shots, it's always a bang, pause, bang, bang. Well, and then later that afternoon, they said, we got Oswald, we got this Mannlicher Carcano bolt-action rifle. I'm going, wait a minute. Because even at that time, I was in my 20s, and I've been hunting. I had bolt-action rifles, and better ones than he had. I had German Mausers. And I said, you can't get a bang-bang with a bolt-action rifle because you have to cock the bolt, eject the empty shell, and ram in the next one, pull the handle down, you know, regain. And here's the key thing, because actually I have a 6.5 Mannlicher Carcano. that we used in a documentary one time, and the gunsmith who had taken it and put a guitar strap on it, just like Oswald had, put a 12-point scope on it. I said, what are you going to do? And when we were finished with the production, I said, what are you going to do with that rifle? He said, I don't know. I said, well, can I buy it? And he said, yeah, probably. I said, what do you want for it? He said, $100. And I went, okay. You know, and this wasn't that far back. And $100 for a rifle, that should tell you what kind of piece of crap it actually was. You know, in fact, I've had it now for maybe almost 20 years, and I've never fired it because I don't want to. All right, because the bolt's loose, you know. And I'm afraid it's going to blow up on me or something. There's a reason why the Italians during the war nicknamed it the Humanitarian weapon, because you couldn't kill anybody with it. So right then I thought, wait a minute, you can't get a bang bang. So but I didn't have anything to put it in its place. I guess my epiphany came in the fall of 1972 when Eugene McCord, one of the Watergate burglars, finally fessed up to the judge. He says, okay, actually we're working for the Committee to Re-elect the President, appropriately acronymed as CREEP. And of course the President was that other creep, Richard Nixon. Well, at that point, you know, it kind of came together for me, and I suddenly realized that the President of the United States could, did, and would lie to us. Okay, and so that's my epiphany. Of course, that was 72. I think it took a lot of others a little longer to reach that epiphany, but, and then see, that was 72, so 3 years later, I was asked to teach a course on the Kennedy assassination at the University of Texas at Arlington. And I thought, well, that'd be a good idea. Russell, weren't you in those classes? Yeah. And so I did that for 30 years until I retired in 2007. I figured, well, after 30 years, if they hadn't got it, they're not going to have it now, you know. So, but the key thing is that back then in 1975, number one, I actually published an article on the front page of the Star Telegram that said if the new talked about committee to investigate Kennedy does their job, they will find there was a coup d'etat in the United States in 1963. So, needless to say, I was the outcast. Everybody thought I was the nut. How can you say something like that? And now, I think most people pretty much agree to all that. They don't know who, they don't know exactly how, they don't know exactly how they made it work, but they do know that it was not just a lone Oswald, and that's why I really honor you folks for coming out and standing by Oswald. I don't know what kind of time I have left, but I'm ready to answer any questions you might have. Answers are free. Truthful answers are $5.
You got 15 minutes.
Okay, great, thank you. And oh yeah, and if you want me to tell you something you've never heard before, that's $1,500. No, all right. Do we have any questions? That's really burning on you. Go ahead.
Not really a question, but just to point out that Oswald did have a Mauser for only 24 hours.
Yeah, right. That's true. He did have a Mauser until it somehow metamorphosed into a. Yeah, it was. Just like I'm trying to think of the AK-47. You know, was just a knockoff of the Germans. Their what do they call it, the MP-42 or something that went anything.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you want a question for Jim Martis, please come up to the microphone so everybody can hear the question. Okay.
There we go.
Mr. Martis, it's an honor, first of all. Thank you.
Thank you.
I read Crossfire so much, it's at home held together by tape and spit, so I gotta get another copy. And Ruled by Secrecy is the first book I give to people whenever they ask me what's going on, because it's the primer. It's got what you need to start.
Thank you for mentioning that, and I want to tell you, I'm really kind of chagrined because we took off with this pile of books and somehow ran off without any Ruled by Secrecies. But I want to tell you guys, if you hadn't read my book, Rule by Secrecy, you really need to, because it will give you the guide path for all of what's happened through history.
And I just wanted to ask you, for the people that say, well, it's not, let's say, oh, it's the mob, or it's just Lyndon Johnson.
Right.
You actually went to the pains to actually go back, and it was the first time, to me, you broke the story. It was the first time I had ever read it, back to when we were attacked at Pearl Harbor, and Churchill calls Roosevelt and says, hey, it's another Port Arthur. And in your book, instead of saying, my God, we've got to do something, Roosevelt's response is, well, that should make our friends happy. So I think you would say that this kind of conspiratorial, these higher powers than any one person have been going on for decades. But I wanted you to speak to it, and thank you again.
Thank you. And yes, absolutely. We now know beyond any question Pearl Harbor was known. We knew it was going to be attacked, and I mean, not everybody, but Roosevelt knew it, George Marshall knew it, okay? In fact, what he was referring to was a late night phone call that was picked up by German Gestapo, and then after the war, the head of the Gestapo, revealed that they had overheard this conversation. And Roosevelt tells, or Churchill says, I'm sorry to call you so late, but it's important. And Roosevelt said, well, I'm sure it is, or you would be calling me. He said, yeah, he said, Pearl Harbor is going to be attacked. And he says, Churchill said, the Japanese fleet has sailed, and Roosevelt said, yeah, I know, we think it's going to the Philippines. He said, no, Franklin, it's going to Pearl Harbor. And he says, what? He says, oh no, another, Port Arthur, another Port Arthur, which was the sneak attack that the Japanese made on the Russians at Port Arthur back at about the time of World War I. So he knew exactly what all this meant. And then he says, well, actually, this could suit our purposes. In other words, to get a united America into World War II. And he said, but he said, how am I going to do that if it comes up to the chain of command? And then he paused. He said, well, I guess if I'm out of town, there's no way to let me know this. So I went back and checked, and sure enough, a day or two before Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt left Washington, was in his Georgia Warm Springs retreat place, so he could, now they could say, well, it didn't. And that's what everybody has argued all the years, is that if anybody knew Pearl Harbor was going to be attacked, it would have gone up the chain of command. Well, it may have, but it stopped at a certain point. So anyway, we know that was it. We know Gulf of Tonkin was phony. We know there's no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. I mean, would they lie to us? I mean, only consistently. Yeah, is there anything they wouldn't lie to us about? In fact, it's gotten so bad that now they just lie routinely, even on matters that probably don't matter. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
13 years ago when you drilled Gene's files for 4 hours, what's your take on his confession?
Okay, that's a good one. I'll try to make this quick because there's so much to say there. As a good, what I consider to be a good journalist, I always thought if I could, and I listened to files, I've heard his story, and I always thought, boy, if I could just get in front of him, look in his eyes, watch his body language, I think I could figure out if he's really telling the truth or not. But I was up there in front of him for, I don't know, more than 2 hours, I think, and he tells a great story. He's very smooth about it. He's not hesitant about coming out with all this. But I got to tell you, folks, after sitting there looking at him, watching his body language and all like that, I was still undecided. I cannot really tell. Of course, that pathological liars can pass polygraph machines. You really can't tell. And without going in, we could spend the whole time here talking about the grassy knoll gunman and the various people. Right now, I'm just going to stick my neck out and say, for my money, based on everything I know, I think the best candidate for the grassy knoll gunman is Roscoe White. All right? And some of you are kind of looking blank and probably hadn't even looked into the Ricky White story, but that hit big time, and I've spent a lot of time with Ricky, and I've looked over all his material, and I've looked over his whole story, and I even remember when the investigator for the Attorney General of Texas came to me because they were getting very interested in the White story because there was a lot to back it up. And then what happened was that Ricky said he had this diary that he found in an old military footlocker from his dad, and in there it just flat stated, it gives details about how he was on the grassy knoll, how many shots he took, etc., etc. And what happened was that he was out in West Texas and Amarillo, I believe, and he'd gone to the FBI headquarters. He had undergone interrogation for almost an entire day. He was just wasted and tired, and he finally got home. And as he was settling down, this FBI agent showed up at his door and said, "I left my notebook in your materials. You mind if I come get it?" And he had them all spread out on this pool table. And he said, "No." And so, but he didn't even bother to get up. His wife went, let the guy in. The guy went back to the table, came running back out, and said, "Okay, I got it, thanks." And he leaves. And then after that, this diary was never seen again. So the FBI took it, all right? Now, everybody's getting excited because too many people had seen the diary, including some prosecutors out in West Texas. But then, all of a sudden, another diary pops up. And this one is just full of anachronisms. They're talking about stuff that had happened at Watergate and stuff like that. And
people that Conley wasn't aware. And then we all know about the violent argument in the hotel room in Fort Worth that morning between LBJ and Kennedy. And Jackie Kennedy attests that he'd never seen such a violent argument before, and JFK had to get really nasty with him. No, the governor's riding with me, and Yarborough's riding with you, and that's it. And Johnson was really pissed. Right. He walks out. So was Conley told, "Don't worry, they're really good aims," or "We're not going to shoot until we get to the trademark"?
Yeah, I think Conley.
Because this is the thing, when you look at the film right up to before the kill shots start flying, Conley doesn't look that concerned.
No.
So
no,
did he not know, and it's like, "Trust us, John, we're going to wait for the trademark," or what?
Yeah, I think there's no question about that. Yeah, Ralph Yarborough told me quite extensively about how that they had a big fight, even out at Love Field. And finally, Kennedy said, "You're the damn governor, get in the car." Okay, so you can imagine how he must have felt. And that also explains his famous cry when the bullets came in the car. Okay, he didn't say, "My God, I'm shot," or "My God, they're shooting at us." He said, "My God, they're going to kill us all."
I heard there were other...
All we need to know is there were multiple gunmen shooting at Kennedy, which leaves out the lone gunman, and definitely proves conspiracy. And if there's a conspiracy and it's been covered up for 53 years by including the Secret Service, the FBI, the federal marshals, all the police agencies, then this is what confirms that we were the victims of a coup d'etat in 1963. We got one more question.
Jim, thanks for your courage and the hard work over the years. Quick, what's your take on what happened to J.D. Tippit?
Oh boy. Okay, well, wait a minute. Can we have another hour and a half here? I'll tell you what, we don't know for absolute sure, but I would suggest that you go to John Armstrong's website, and I can't even remember now what exactly that is. Anybody knows? It's not in Google. Yeah, I think so. HarveyandLee.com. Thank you. And he's got a pretty interesting take on some of the Dallas police officers that were involved, and under his scenario, it definitely explains how they got Oswald's two different wallets, even though he left one wallet at home. All you guys out there, how many wallets have you got? I don't know about you, but I only got one. Okay, and Oswald had 3 or 4 of them. So anyway, and so yeah, go ahead and read that. I think there was definitely some chicanery going on because for one thing, I'm just going to add this real quick. There's absolutely no way that Oswald shot Tippit. because at the time I could have produced 3 witnesses, including Butch Burroughs, the assistant manager at Texas Theater, who all said he was in the theater no later than 1:10 or so, and before Tippit was shot. He was shot blocks away. So, you know, if you had those 3 alibi witnesses and there was a fair trial, he would never have been convicted of shooting Tippit. But the only other thing I'll add is whoever shot Tippit was not just shooting at the cop to get away. According to the House Committee, and this is correct according to the autopsy, whoever shot him hit him in the heart, he fell down, and then they walked over and put one in his head, the coup de grace. Okay? Whoever it was wanted Tippit dead.
One final question. In all of your research, have you ever heard the term cosmic clearance?
Yeah.
Okay. Because my dad was at the Naval Intelligence School when he was at the grassy knoll next to the other shooter. And he was with the Naval Intelligence and the CIA. When he was positioned at the Dallas Police Department, when the House Select came in, he pulled pictures from the police files that they were to use for that investigation. After that year, he transferred over, laddered over to the Dallas Fire Department. He was chief photographer there for 15 years. But when I'm going through his diaries and his films and negatives in the last couple of months, I found his book and a list of the people in the Photo Intelligence Division and the different clearances they had, and I wondered if you'd heard that term.
I've heard the term.
Okay,
Was on that list of, it was Roscoe White's name on that
I've
list?
got to look at, I've got files and negatives and pictures. We can
Check
look
and
at it.
see, because we know that Roscoe White was a member of the police department, had just joined.
He had told me that Oswald did carry the gun, but did not fire the gun. He was part of the CIA team with him. One person on the team went bonkers. They begged to get out, said your families will be killed, and you.
Yeah.
He was embedded at Texas Instruments in the photo lab there, but the folks at Texas Instruments did not know that.
There we go. Is this an extensive
He died
or what?
He died in 2014, and on his deathbed, he asked me to help him get his last debriefing, and I had to go to my congressman to get it. The Dallas FBI office would not help us, and the congressman had to go all the way to Washington to get that his last debriefing. He wouldn't talk to anyone unless they knew his code name.
Interesting. There you go. All right.
Thank you.
And thank you all very much.
Guys, we have a few minutes here. Technical difficulties, no, but we have to get a couple things going here before Dr. Webb comes on. I encourage you to stay around. We're only talking about 5 minutes because you will definitely want to know what Dr. Webb is going to say. Everyone as well, just so you know, there is a raffle. You can buy tickets outside with Lori in. We're going to be raffling off several items, some books, some of the banners and so forth. So please stick around for that.
Oh yeah, many places. I got so many.
I love that. Are you selling those buttons?